Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Technology Philosophy. Today I'd like to discuss Catherine Malabou's book, What Should We Do with Our Brain, and her concept of plasticity, whether it is irreducibly political. The main argument is that Malabou's notion of plasticity is an irreducibly political concept to the extent that, in her oeuvre and in Hegel, it is fundamentally concerned with the consciousness-raising activity of subjectivation. Further, in Malabou's brain, plasticity is political because it is a vision for emancipation and a tool for oppression. She claims that her project is political and unfolds her concept of plasticity in response, detailing how they are directly related and allowing an inference of plasticity's political in governance, coordination, and subjectivation. Plasticity includes the constructive and destructive capacities of form. The latter, though ultimately without grounds, is the source of plasticity's emancipatory power. There is significant extent to which plasticity is not irreducibly political concept. Like liberty, emancipation, and plasticity would need to be connected more clearly. Also, there is a missed account of the materialist approach to the political, how biological plasticity, once transformed in subjectivation, proceeds at the societal level, and how the plasticity subjectivated individual becomes political and acts in individual and collective opposition to global capitalism. My method is to develop the background context of plasticity and the political in Brain, then draw upon Malabou's other work, thought lineage, and secondary literature. In Brain, Malabou's concept of plasticity is developed in three senses, with regard to form, historicity, and subjectivation. First and most centrally is the sense of form, where plasticity is the capacity to receive form, give form, and annihilate form. The word plasticity derives from the Greek plastein, to mold, which supports only the first two of Malabou's senses, the capacity to receive form, clay, and the capacity to give form, plastic surgery, plastic arts. She declares the destructive capacity aspect without further justification. Plasticity is also the capacity to annihilate the very form that it is able to receive or create, where the threat of the explosion of form structurally inhabits every form. The constructive and destructive aspects of plasticity are then used as endpoints, where plasticity is graduated, situated between the extremes of taking on form and annihilating form. The two extremes are determinism and freedom, where plasticity designates all possible transformations of form in between. Plasticity is also framed in the sense of the individual and the collective. The collective sense of plasticity is historicity. Malabou draws attention to the problem that despite significant scientific advance in neuroscience, we still do not know who we are. Plasticity might be able to link these two because it is the work of the brain engaging with history, like neuroscience advance, and the brain's manner of developing itself. The bond between brain and history is an identity. There is a constitutive history of the brain, and her aim is to awaken a consciousness, philosophical, scientific, and political, of this historicity. The individual sense of plasticity is subjectivation. Individual personalities can be reformed. They are not pre-established, and each individual is able to receive and create his or her own form independently. There is an intermediate plasticity between the proto-self and the conscious self that enables the formation of the singular person on the basis of the neuronal matrix. A free self is one that is auto-constituted between inheriting and creating, between receiving and giving form, e.g. not through the destructive capacity of form. The fashioning of a self-identity merges biology and history to create a free psychical consciousness or identity, so identity has both individual and collective aspects. Now, having delineated the concept of plasticity, there are several senses in which plasticity is an irreducible political concept. The most straightforward case is Malabou's framing of the problem state of the world. Plasticity itself is neutral, but like any new tool, the powerful, corporate elites, have appropriated it for their own use in creating new forms of oppression. Awakening consciousness to plasticity's true nature and universal availability as a remedy is the required emancipation. Plasticity is irreducibly political as a tool for both oppression and liberation. The second case is Malabou's own account of plasticity in the political and garnering a sense of what is political to her. She explicitly declares the political aspect of plasticity. Plasticity has a political dimension, responsibility in the double movement of the receiving and giving of form, and plasticity includes social life, which is political life, where any vision of the brain is necessarily political. While these are claims of the political aspect of plasticity, the linkage is neither clear nor expounded, e.g., it does not necessarily follow that a plastic model of the brain would be political, and likewise how the responsibility in receiving and giving form would be political. Indirectly, we can infer a more extensive conceptualization of Malabou's political in three dimensions: governance, coordination, and subjectivation. Regarding governance, she means political systems in society tied to economics and mode of production, existing as fluid, decentralized processes. Regarding coordination and organization, her political vision is one of interaction based on recognition, non-domination, and liberty. Coordination and organization could exist similarly in the brain as in society, as simultaneously a dynamic, structure, and organization. Regarding subjectivation, she sees the subject as self-fashioning a new plasticity-promulgated identity that can overturn injustice. Momentarily leaving aside critique, the third case is that plasticity's destructive capacity is irreducibly political because it is linked to empowerment. In the Hegelian dialectical sense, a unity of opposites, form-giving and form-destroying, is required for plasticity's full constitution as a concept. Construction and destruction are contradictory, yet nonetheless indissociable. The destructive potential of plasticity is what gives the concept power and the ability to oppose flexibility, even if weakly formulated as its opposition. Plasticity without destructive capacity is just flexibility. This has allowed global capitalism to appropriate plasticity for its own use. Further, the explosive capacity is what creates emancipatory action. There are many productive activities of destruction within the notion of explosion and rupture short of annihilation. For example, model erasing, deprogramming, and resistance. The destructive capacity of plasticity is an agency of disobedience to every constituted form, a refusal to submit to a model, allowing the program to be eventualized, deprogrammed, and reprogrammed in resistance to oppressive models like neuronal ideology, because formative change proceeds by rupture, conflicts, and dilemmas. Rupture should be embraced as a jolt out of flexibility. Next, it is important to note the extent to which plasticity is not an irreducibly political concept. First, the political agenda in the background in Brain. While her stated meta-project is political, the subjectivation process of neuronal liberation to overcome global capitalism, the foreground and main content of the book is elaborating plasticity and the transitions of neuronal to political, e.g. societal, and neuronal to mental, e.g. mind to brain. Second, there is no direct political action component. Despite living at the hour of neuronal liberation, it is unclear how the plasticity subjectivated individual is to act in opposition to global capitalism to effect its better alternative, biological alter-globalism. A third and central issue in Brain is a missed articulation of an emancipatory project at the societal level. Malabou repeats the four-node structure of synapse brain self-society, and while biological plasticity is greatly elaborated in its extension to subjectivation, it is not further extended to society. Stiegler, too, misses this societal elaboration with a strikingly similar notion of the central nervous system becoming the manipulable organ of a neuropower, and a progression from biopower to psychopower to neuropower. There is also a missed account of the plasticity transformed subject as political subject. For plasticity to be truly irreducibly political, there would need to be a more detailed and foregrounded account of its connection to liberty and emancipation. Now, having set forth the extent to which Malabou's plasticity is and is not political in brain, a more detailed critique is needed regarding the validity of the destructive aspect of plasticity. At issue are its accuracy, justification, and derivation. In terms of accuracy, literally, form does not have the power to self-destruct on its own. Per Malabou, plastique is an explosive substance capable of causing violent explosions, but it does not immediately follow that plastic explosive would be part of plasticity. I posit that there are unconsidered boundaries and nuance in plasticity's destructive capacity of form. Regarding the threat of the explosion of form in every form, the word threat can be emphasized and read as more metaphorical than literal. Plato's ideal of the circular form can remain intact. The unrealized threat of the explosion of form is a non-occurring deterrent needed to give weight to the concept of plasticity. The notion of explosive potential serves as a boundary that allows form to be shaped in the plasticity between determinism and freedom. Next, once shaped, form usually stays in place and may only change under certain conditions. Even in the marquee example of malleability, stem cells, with their capacity for self-reform and differentiation, despite any potential for change, once finally differentiated, generally remain fixed and do not explode or change at random. There are conditions for refining form where form can tolerate rework without being elastic or polymorphic. The function of a self-healing reparative plasticity is one such condition, with adult neurogenesis as a result. Next, a question arises as to the role of volition, since the inherent destructive capacity of form seems not to require intervention. Any necessary rupture would be provoked naturally. However, a volitional component is required because this does not happen, and we fail to realize the benefits of plasticity because we are so immersed in it that we conflate it with flexibility. The brain is plastic, free, but we are everywhere still in chains. We need to become conscious of our brain's plasticity and potentiality to realize it. Our brain is plastic, and we do not know it. Summarizing my reading, the destructive capacity of plasticity is a required conceptual metaphorical threat where certain conditions are required for actual change to occur, in which subjectivation-driven volition may be a key element. Lending credibility to this metaphorical or gestural use of explosive capacity, in Wounded, Malabou confirms that she merely evokes destructive plasticity without ever concretely envisioning it, using it elusively to explore the creative dimensions of plasticity and the ability to oppose flexibility. Given her thought lineage, there is ample motivation for the destructive aspect in many ways, most prominently in the Hegelian dialectical unity of oppositions and the general philosophical necessity of opposites, Derrida's forgiving the unforgivable, the problem of how a just world is possible without injustice, and also in Heidegger's destruction of metaphysics in order to proceed anew, and Hegel and Heidegger's finitude. However, we still need the grounds for the derivation of plasticity's destructive capacity, for which we will look to Hegel, simultaneously seeking additional grounds for the extent to which plasticity may be political. In Hegel, her book, Malabou develops the concept of plasticity in Hegel's thought, where overall it has a key role in subjectivation. Hegel uses the concept in three ways: plastic arts, sculpture; plastic individuality, exemplary humans, free, independent, and self-made; and philosophical plasticity, the philosophical attitude and means of argument presentation. Following from these meanings, plastic discourse is when the philosophizing subject embodies the universal, translating the spiritual into materiality. Plasticity is a process where the universal and the particular mutually inform each other in the exemplary individual. Plasticity is mostly developed in the science of logic. There is only one mentioned in the phenomenology, which again pertains to plastic discourse. Only a philosophical exposition that rigidly excludes the usual way of relating the parts of a proposition could achieve the goal of plasticity. This refers to the situation that usually in a philosophical proposition, the subject of the proposition is fixed with predicates given from outside. However, in plastic discourse, the subject can self-produce predicates, which allows the relation between subject substance and predicate, or substance's relation to its accidents or particulars, to be reconceptualized as a process of substance's self-determination. Substance's relation to its accidents, e.g. its particularity, changes, and this is the transition from the traditional predicative proposition to the transformative plastic speculative proposition. In the process of self-determination, the universal, substance, and the particular, accidents, give form to each other as substance withdraws from life in order to enter into the particularity of its content. Through this movement of self-negation, substance posits itself as subject. For Malabou, this self-determination is the originary operation of plasticity, and plasticity is the concept capable of accounting for the incarnation of spirit. So that is Hegel's plasticity through Malabou, where subjectivation is central. Regarding plasticity's destructive aspect, in Hegel, she refers to the usual meanings of plasticity as being capable of receiving and giving form. She then acknowledges some of her extensions in the use of plasticity, including that plastic on its own is an explosive material with a nitroglycerin and nitrocellulose base that can set off violent detonations, where again plasticity has the extremes of the crystallization of form, sculpture, and the annihilation of all form, the bomb. No further explanation is given, and again the explosive capacity of plastique and the concept of plasticity are not necessarily connected. However, there are some grounds for plasticity's destructive capability in Hegelian concepts related to plasticity and substance's self-determining transformation to subject. Substance manifests itself simultaneously as creative power and destructive power. The two are identical. The creation is destructive and the destruction creative. For the negative and the positive, possibility and actuality, are absolutely united in substantial necessity. In this specific case of the relation of substance and accidents, e.g. the universal and particular, substance manifests itself simultaneously as creative and destructive power. Substance, form, pre-subjectivated substance, is necessarily composed of creative power and destructive power in the sense of Hegelian dialectical opposites that require and define each other and form a unity. In Hegel, the passage occurs in section 1239 in the science of logic regarding actuality and the absolute relation, the relation between substantiality and accidentality, the universal and the particular. Form is the unity of possibility and actuality. As we saw earlier, there is a negation process in self-determination where the ceasing to be of the accident, the particular, is the withdrawal of itself as actuality into itself, into its possibility. Specifically here, in this case, substance manifests itself through actuality with its content into which it translates the possible as creative power, and through the possibility to which it reduces the actual as destructive power. So in self-determination, substance self-destructs some of its former actuality and particularity into possibility and universality. Ultimately, this is a much narrower notion of destruction. There is a specific kind of destructive relation, a reciprocal exchange, that occurs in a particular process of subjectivation. And while related to plasticity, since plasticity facilitates a new relation of the universal and the particular, allowing self-determination, it does not support the explosive capacity meaning of plasticity. Later in Hegel, Malabou continues to link plasticity to explosiveness, situating Hegelian finitude in plasticity. Plasticity means what is vital, but is always susceptible to petrification. If it expresses what is most essential and primal in life, it is no less in alliance with the atomic bomb. So we are to understand that another dimension of plasticity's destructive capacity is mortal finitude, which is an extension that makes sense, but the further reference to the atomic bomb is startling and abrupt. Generously, this could mean that the height of self-destruction is self-explosion, but the destructive capacity of an atomic bomb goes far beyond the self-destruction of an individual form. Her strong emphasis and word choice is strange. In secondary literature, James has a sympathetic reading of Malabou, where there is a new use of destructive plasticity's creation through destruction in Malabou's Wounded. She posits a type of plasticity and that through a wound, a new form of identity is created in the effacement of the old. While Brain and Wounded consider the implications of creative and destructive plasticity for personal and collective subjectivation, their real value is in elaborating a new materialist understanding of thought and subjectivity. Cerebrality, the neuronal self, the materially created brain, is the way forward after the deconstruction of subjectivity. It is realized by linking plasticity to thought, since plasticity has the power to naturalize or materialize consciousness and meaning. Between plasticity's endpoints of determinism and freedom, forms are produced in the movement of différance, where existing in true freedom is changing difference while respecting the difference of change. Ultimately, the concept of plasticity is irreducibly political to the extent that its central concern is subjectivation. The argument is that subjectivation is in some sense the apogee and precondition of the political, since it is the ability to facilitate the subject's transformation into new levels of awareness, consciousness, and action-taking. Another dimension of plasticity's political is its destructive aspect, since there is no greater freedom than the ability to destroy one's own form. There are no grounds for this aspect other than Malabou's metaphorical exploration and the specific indirect use in Hegel. And this is troubling since plasticity continues to be an expansive and portable concept across Malabou's oeuvre and is now being extended to higher stakes areas like thought in Brain, identity in Wounded, and embodiment in Sois mon coeur, where she relies on plasticity to act within constructive and destructive endpoints. In Brain, her whole emancipatory project falls apart since without its destructive capacity, plasticity cannot oppose flexibility and trigger a new self-fashioning of identity to oppose global capitalism. However, grounds for the endpoints argument might be alternatively derived. Plasticity in its expanded usage could become well-formed in other ways than the admittedly weak plasticity-flexibility opposition, and it could be more fruitful to focus on other philosophical concepts in Malabou, such as materiality. Here, materiality, as the third aspect of plasticity's political, could be valuable for our being, future, and que faire, what to do with ourselves, extending the progression of the biologically neuronal to the neuronal self, to the political self and the mental self, and on to society, could give a materialist approach to the collective political that might not only be useful in itself, but also finally a solution in a different register, grounded in science, not the humanities, to successfully address the corruptive and dominative tendencies of governments and institutions. Thank you. Please join us next time on Technology Philosophy.